Please welcome Bryan Christian.
So the name of this story is "Oh Wait, I've Dated You Before." So basically, I blame the New York Times for all of this, because before gay men and women were included in the weddings and celebrations section of the New York Times, it was called the sports pages for women. It was when people go, who was getting married, how young is she, so on and so forth. So now that gay men are in there, I feel a little pressure. I want to know how people meet. Everybody wants to know how you meet, and is it a good story? Did you meet at Barry's boot camp? Were you, trekking through Jakarta or something like that? So I felt like if I were to get married, I would need a really good story, because you do not see stories that say John and Dave gave each other 4 stars and went and had awkward coffee and decided to make it go. That is just not the story. Or, oh, they hit each other up on Scruff, and, now they're So, I felt like I needed a good story. I prefer something more along the lines of, I was reading Middlemarch at Pasties, he was reading Middlemarch, and then we started talking, and nobody ever actually reads Middlemarch. So, and then, when people ask you, oh, how'd you meet? Normally I just go, because I just meet people online, it's very efficient, it's just what you do. But I want a good story, because my mother, who does not really understand why I'm on Facebook, I never tell her, oh, well, I met online. I'm like, oh, it's a friend of a friend, or oh, I met him on the subway, which she doesn't really like either. I'm like, oh, I met on the subway, so on and so forth. So, Christmas last year, best story ever. I'm at the airport, I'm in LaGuardia, I'm going home to Michigan to see my parents. And I'm standing there, I'm eating pizza. And eating pizza to me never looks sexy, but I was starving, so I'm eating pizza. And there's a guy, he's kind of over there, and he's staring at me, and I will insert the, well, how do you know? It's like, we always just know. It's like, how whales can be on opposite sides of each other, they can communicate with each other, and they're like, he doesn't know. So I see him, and I'm fine, whatever. So he kind of inches closer and closer, and I'm doing the crust and testing, and so then he's right here. So I'm okay. So I think to myself, well, he who hesitates is lost. So I go up to him and I was like, have we met? Because he seemed pretty familiar. He's cute, he's tall, and all these things. And he's like, no, I don't think so. And he was like, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I work in book publishing. And I was like, what do you do? And he's like, oh, well, I teach at some college in Queens, and this, that, and the other. So we chat for a little bit. And I was like, are you sure we don't have a friend in common? Something like that. So he's like, no. So chat for a little bit, they call my flight, I'm getting ready to go. And he was like, well, we should have a drink when Christmas is over. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So he sends me a text message, he asks for my phone number, sends me a text message. And it just says, hi, this is Jonathan from the airport. Clearly I couldn't take my eyes off of you. So you're like, aww. So I get on the plane, we text a little bit more, I go to Michigan. By the time I get to Michigan, this has blown into a full-blown text love affair. It is constant texting. Are you home? What are you doing? I'm about to have dinner. Da, 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 da. Oh, my parents are so annoying. Back and forth, all day long. It's the kind of texting where if it were 1978, I would be laying on a pink bed with a canopy, with his phone, kicking my legs back and forth. It'd be like a Sean Cassidy poster on the wall. So, but it's just ridiculous. Pretty much how I envision teenagers are now. But all fine and well. So about 2 days in, I'm literally, I was like, I know him. You know where I know him from? I have already been out with him. So then it all, when you finally remember something and it just comes rushing back at you. So I was it was spring of 2009, we went on 2 dates. First date, we went and had drinks. He drank a vodka and tonic, I remember that. Second date, we went to Barnes & Noble, we went to see a movie, it was fun. And then he just vanished. So I texted him and I was like, oh, you know what, I remember where we met. So he's like, where? And I said, oh, we went out. This happened. So he writes back, he's like, oh shit. So clearly he's mortified by this, but he texts and he's like, clearly it must have been your fault because I never would have let you get away. So I'm like, oh, that's so sweet. So one thing I do know from online dating is that it's always better to get people like off of the computer and into real life as quickly as possible, because anybody can make themselves seem clever over email or over text message. So you have to limit that and get them into real life, and then just cut your losses if that's what you have to do. So I text him and I say, you know what, let's just cool it on the texting for a little bit, because nothing is going to live up to all of this. So I can tell, like, you know how you could totally tell when people are annoyed over text message? So I can tell he's a little annoyed, but he seems fine with it. And he's like, all right, well, why don't we have dinner on Saturday? He picks the restaurant, this place is La Carbonara on 14th Street. Picks the time, the whole thing. So I was like, good, take charge, sets everything up, great. So Saturday comes. So the minute I see him, I'm kind of like, eh. Like, over. I was like, eh. First of all, he was wearing black jeans, which just bugged the shit out of me. I'm just like, oh, black jeans. So sit down and he's like, oh, I've been sick, I don't think I'll be drinking too much. And in my head, I'm like, well, that's one of us. So sit down, and he launches in with all these questions, and not like, how's your holiday, but like, really like, who are you, what kind of relationship do you want, where do you see yourself in 5 years, like very deep questions where I'm a little thrown off. And one thing that I do know about myself is I tend to lead with like what I'm not. So I'm more like, well, I'm not like overly affectionate, but it doesn't mean I don't care. Because I feel like it's like dating caveat emptor. Like if you like me this way, then you will like love me no matter what. So like he's just very intense, very like in my face. So I'm like, fine, whatever. So dinner kind of meanders on. We talk about life and movies and whatnot and hopes and dreams and so on and so forth. So I'm kind of like, okay. Like if this had been the first date, I would have been like, oh, you know what? There's room for improvement. We'll go on a second date. But since this was technically the third date, I was like, oh no, we're not going on a fourth date. So walk outside, and he's like, well, I feel like we should be chaste, on our first date. And I was like, yeah, no shit. So he kind of leans in for the kiss, and it's kind of like, I was like, fine, whatever. So by now, so we're on 7th and 14th. So I live in Brooklyn, so I'm planning on walking over to 8th Avenue to get on the C train. He lives in Queens, so in my head, I'm like, oh, you're gonna walk over to Union Square, get on the NQR, and be on your merry way. But instead, he's like, oh, well, I can take the E train. So I'm like, God damn it. Now I'm like, we're gonna have to walk over there together. We're gonna have to like swipe our Metro cards together. Then we're gonna have like awkward goodbye on the upper platform. Then we're gonna be like standing across from each other on the two platforms. And there's cell service there now too. So I'm like, oh, there might have to be some texting, or like gestures or something. So I'm just totally, because in my head, I'm totally like, I have ice cream at home. There's 2 episodes of Nashville that I do. Like, I literally have that evening planned out beyond. So anyway, because God doesn't hate me all the time, his train comes right away, and he's just like, so I'm like, thank God. So I have a plan. The next day, I'm gonna wait like a day, then I'm gonna send the, I loved how we met, this was so great, but I don't really think we're a match text. But instead, I get this text, which I've had on my phone for 6 months. You just never know when you tell the story again, it has to be read verbatim. So I get this text. So, Brian, let me be more clear this time. On paper, you are everything I could ever want in a guy, but last night I was reminded more specifically of why I backed off the first time. I am sure you are a perfect match for someone, but for me, you are way too negative. It gets better. And every time a good-looking guy passed, you looked at him as if you wanted to fuck him on the spot. Maybe it is just being human. I found it rude. I was right the first time. Happy to speak to you about it if you want to chat. Otherwise, goodbye and Happy New Year. Okay, so first of all, I resent being called an eye whore. Because, A, I just have a little touch of the ADD. Like, my friends know to not let me sit facing the door or anything like that. So that was the first thing. Second of all, no, I don't want to fucking chat. It's like, it is not HR. We're not going to review my we're going to call you up and we're not going to chat about it. Like, and I also resent his implication that there was clarity the first time, you know, or that he was unclear the first time and he's going to make it much more clear because there was no clarity at all, so fuck you. And then, the final thought was this. I was like, oh my God, I've dated so many people that I'm on repeats. And then it actually made me realize that maybe the awkward coffee date and they made a go of it isn't so bad.